Hi everyone, Sturkis here, and today I will be doing my second most cursed video, which is an antidepressant tier list. This is not medical advice. Something I rate low may work well for you. Something I rate well might work terribly for you. That's a conversation between you and your doctor, not from a completely irrelevant internet personality. Now I'm going to be rating these based on how cool I think they are personally, whether or not I'd want to take it as a connoisseur myself, how effective they are, and their side effect profile. I'm only going to be using small molecule drugs that have been approved by the FDA for major depressive disorder. I really don't want to do adjuncts or off-label things because this would be way too long. I'd love to do something on that in the future, like things that are not officially primary treatments for MDD that are really good. But for now, we're going to stick with the basics. So we'll start with El Clasico here, or Prozac, SSRI. I'm sure many of you know the pros and cons of that. Pros, it does work on depression. It's about 50% response, 30% remission. There are people out there who take Prozac and it genuinely changes their lives and they cure depression and they live a long and happy life. It is a miracle pill for some people. Not for a lot of people, but for some people. Also, placebo has an effect sometimes too. So again, effect size wise, power as an AD, it's kind of weak. Side effects, typical SSRI side effects. So your penis stops working, or if you're a girl, your girl penis stops working, right? You can put on weight, you can have fatigue, you can occasionally become agitated, or initially have suicidal thoughts and behaviors, especially if you're under 25. That's a whole big fiasco. Eli Lilly actually covered that one up a long time ago. I'm planning on making a video on that. All in all, it's fine. It's underrated, but only because it's rated so badly. I'm going to give it a C, which, as you'll see, for antidepressants, a C could be a lot worse. Looking at Luvoxamine. Now, just because I'm not taking into account drugs that do not have an indication for major depressive disorder, I am going to take other indications they have into account, because depression is comorbid with a lot of different things, and if you have something that can kill two birds with one stone, that's always better. I should have mentioned that for Prozac. Prozac is used for OCD. It's one of the most common drugs used for OCD, and it's used for generalized anxiety disorder, and it's fairly relatively effective in those, maybe a little better than it is as an antidepressant. Luvox kind of falls into the same category as Prozac in that it is used as an OCD drug. I am not a doctor. I'm not sure what prescribing patterns are like, but I would venture, based on people on the internet, Luvox or fluvoxamine is used much more commonly as an OCD drug now. As an antidepressant, I'm fairly certain that this falls in the usual SSRI efficacy category. I personally hate it, but scientifically, mathematically, statistically, it's fine. It does inhibit, I believe, the enzyme that metabolizes caffeine, or it and caffeine share the same CYP enzyme. So it has interactions with caffeine, which is kind of shitty because almost every single person is hooked on that. And if you're taking an SSRI, that might make you tired. You're going to need more caffeine. So it's a C. It's a C. If I had an F, this would be a D. Okay, Nardil. For all of my Nardoggers out there, I'd like to say hello. If you don't know what MAOI is, it's a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. These were the drugs they gave people before they had anything else. Invented, I believe Nardil comes out in the 60s, I think. Originally, the first antidepressants were made when they gave people TB drugs that had monoamergic, so they worked on serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. They had monoamergic effects, and the people who were in the TB room, the TB ward, were, their mood was improving. And from that came MAOIs, because a lot of those antibiotic drugs they were using for TB at the time were MAOI inhibitors. Now, Nardil is still used today. It is an extremely powerful drug. An MAOI is different from an SSRI in a lot of ways. An SSRI blocks reuptake of serotonin in the synapse, right? And what that effectively does is it effectively raises the serotonin in your synapse, the amount of serotonin that is available, which agonizes every kind of serotonin receptor. Nardil is not selective at all. It's basically a nuke. It inhibits MAOA and MAOB. Those are responsible for breaking down serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So it inhibits almost all of those enzymes, and as a result, pretty much every neurotransmitter in your body just shoots up. It also has a lot of off-target effects, which is part of the issue we'll get into in a second. It's extremely effective for depression, extremely effective for anxiety, extremely effective for social anxiety specifically. It's one of the reasons it's used. It's also a GABA transmembrase, I don't think I'm pronouncing that correctly, inhibitor. So it stops GABA, which slows your brain down from turning into glutamate, which speeds your brain up. So it has a lot of really cool effects, and it's very effective. So why don't we use this all the time? Some pretty good reasons. Probably the weakest of them is that Nardil is a hydrazine-based drug, and it can have significant liver toxicity. It's not horrible. It's not as bad as some things, but your body doesn't love processing Nardil. There's the famous cheese effect, which is when you take an MAOI inhibitor and you have an amino acid called tyramine. I'm not sure if tyramine is an amino acid. It's some kind of protein-like building block, right? If you have tyramine, your body can no longer process that in a normal way, and it creates a blood pressure pressor effect. So basically, if you eat food with tyramine, your blood pressure shoots up. It can become dangerous. And those foods that include tyramine are pretty much all hard cheeses, soy sauce. There's a lot of different stuff you can't eat. The diet is very restrictive, and if you don't follow it, you get the worst headache you've ever experienced because your blood pressure is at 180 over something. Along with that, because they increase serotonin so much by removing one of your body's two ways of getting rid of serotonin, if you take it with an SSRI, you can die of serotonin syndrome because your body can no longer reuptake serotonin and it cannot metabolize serotonin. Also, when you start an MAOI, it tanks your blood pressure. Think like up to 60 over 30 standing up. It's orthostatic hypotension, very hard to deal with. It constipates you, can cause urinary retention. Basically, since it does everything every antidepressant does, it has every side effect every antidepressant does. So it's hard to grade this because if you're taking Nardil in 2024, it's because you don't have a lot of options left, or you want to go for the biggest gun in town. It's not for your average person. For the average person who needs an antidepressant, hasn't tried anything yet, this is the D or C. But for the population it's indicated for, treatment-resistant people, I gotta give the B. And people who love Nardil are going to be like, why is that not an S? It saved my life. I've been on it for 30 years. And people who hate MAOIs and hate Nardil are going to be like, this shit ruined me. I gained 50 pounds, which is another thing it does. Oh, I hate it. Put it in D. Whatever. It is what it is. Moving on to Parnate. Parnate, or tricyclopramine, I can never pronounce that, is another MAOI inhibitor. It's similar to Nardil in a lot of ways. They both inhibit MAOA and MAOB. They're both irreversible inhibitors, but Parnate's got a little bit of a different profile. The side effects tend to be a little less severe, a bit more stimulating, especially at lower doses. I'm not sure what the mechanism behind that is. It does not have Nardil's GABA-T activity, so it's a little bit less used for anxiety, but it can work very well on anxiety. It's still acting on serotonin and norepinephrine very strongly, which are, pathways used in many other drugs, usually in the forms of reuptake inhibitors. So, a similar drug in a lot of ways, a bit less sedating, a bit less making you super obese. Still has the issues with blood pressure and the cheese effect. I'm also going to give it a B. I think situationally, these two are fairly equal. Now we have mirtazapine or Remeron, which is a pretty interesting antidepressant. It's not used a ton. It's used sometimes, I think. Again, I don't have the prescribing amounts in any real way. It's a selective antagonist of 5-HT2 and 3, which 5-HT means serotonin receptor. It also works in the noradrenic system. It's just an interesting drug all around. It can be a very effective antidepressant, and people have said it's somewhat stimulating if you get to a high enough dose, but typically the doses they give people, it's very heavily sedating, so it's often used at night as a sleep aid, and it can be fairly effective at that. The main issue with Remeron, with mirtazapine, is again the sedation, because if you are looking to take this during the day as an antidepressant, it is highly sedating. You put on weight like crazy, kind of like with Nardil. You can put on a lot of weight with this, which is not ideal for most people. Again, it doesn't happen to everyone, but it's a very common theme. Remeron does work very well though, and it can be used with, I believe, Effexor in a antidepressant prescription combination called California Rocket Fuel. I don't know if it's particularly effective, but I like the name a lot. I've heard it around. So I'm going to give Remeron a C. Again, it's effective. It's interesting, but it's kind of held back by its side effect profile. And now we have Effexor. So it's the reason why Cymbalta won't be on this list, because I know they aren't the same, but I consider Effexor and Cymbalta to be fairly similar drugs. And I will use Effexor to represent all common SNRIs. So as an SNRI, serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. SNRIs tend to be slightly more effective than SSRIs, a little bit. They can be good drugs, but their side effect profiles, understandably, are a little bit worse. The more targets you have, usually the worse your side effects are. So side effect profile is a little bit worse, but the most notable thing for SNRIs, in my eyes, is how severe the discontinuation syndrome is. I can't call it withdrawal because you're technically not addicted, but your body starts vomiting and hating itself if you stop taking it. Effexor is one of those drugs where you hear the stories about people, cutting pills in half, or not even cutting pills in half, like they're taking the beads, counting the beads in pills, because just a tiny amount less will give them a withdrawal. So it's nasty, but again, it's probably saved some people's lives. Its side effect profile is not as bad as some of the other ones mentioned, so it's going to go in what will eventually be a very crowded C tier. Now we have Lexapro. This might not be the most famous antidepressant, but certainly the most used one I've seen. It is an enantiomerically pure version of another drug called Celexa, and it's pretty much, for those of you who don't know much about organic chemistry, it's basically just Celexa, but a little bit better, and you can use a lower dose because you're not using the ineffective enantiomer. You're only using the effective enantiomer. So it's kind of like an upgraded version. It was probably only made to basically get a fresh patent from the FDA. Well, the FDA doesn't give out patents, right? But fresh FDA exclusivity and patent for just using the one enantiomer. But it does seem to be a fairly effective drug. It has the best side effect profile, anecdotally, out of all the SSRIs. It's used often for generalized anxiety disorder. It's a very good first-line drug. It still causes, penis issues, fatigue, and weight gain, right? But it seems to be a favorite, especially for an anxiety disorder or for comorbid anxiety. I don't know if this has earned itself a B, but I will give it a strong C. So Nefazodone. You've probably never heard of Nefazodone. So Nefazodone is very epic. I will state that immediately. I'm very biased. I've never taken it. Wish I had the opportunity to. Doctors are afraid to prescribe it. Before we get to that, let's get into how it works. It is an SNRI, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine inhibitor. It is a triple reuptake inhibitor. And what that gives it is kind of like how Nardil and Parnate raise every neurotransmitter, right? This does the same thing. But with Nardil and Parnate, when you take out MAOI and MAOB, those things break down more than just those three monoamines. They break down a lot of different things in your body. So you have God knows how many side effects, right? This is much more selective, and people tend to find it's very balanced and has a good side effect profile. Again, if you look at the studies on this, there's nothing saying it's conclusively much better than anything else, but look on the internet, look what people say. People tend to like this a lot. I think its mechanism is very cool. The side effect profile seems very good. I might be bro-sciencing this a bit, because again, not built off really any good RCTs. I think this is a very good drug, and I wish I could have taken it. So why is it not prescribed? Well, Nefazodone has a neat little trick where it has a very, very minuscule chance of destroying your liver. And people tend not to appreciate that. Well, doctors tend not to appreciate that. The lifetime odds, I think, are something absurdly low, like 1 in 10,000. But that's enough to scare off most doctors from prescribing it. Similar with MAOIs, they aren't prescribed for safety reasons. I personally disagree with this. If you've ever experienced true severe depression, or if you've had it come back throughout your life, I can guarantee you the odds of you dying from that depression, as sad as that might sound, is much higher than the 1 in 10,000 chance that Nefazodone destroys your liver. But bad press, right? Anyway, I'm going to put this in A, partially because I want something in A. Yeah, I'll live with that. Vilazodone. Not much to say on Vilazodone. It's a serotonin modulator. It's not very effective. It was approved because it was more effective than placebo, and in some of the studies it seemed to work very quickly. But the long-term remission rates, not even long-term, the full remission rates, like you don't have depression anymore, same as placebo, not significantly different. And getting full remission from depression is very important because getting full remission reduces your chances of it coming back, and also because even just having some depression is pretty shitty, and if you're going to take a drug for it, you want the drug to work a little better than that. So for being shitty, having side effects, not working, pretty much has a 0% chance over a placebo of making your depression go away, this gets the first D. Trintellix, or Paroxetine. Pretty much everyone's doctor prescribed this to them in the mid-2010s. It's an interesting drug. It's not quite an SSRI. It's another one of those serotonin modulator type drugs. I'm speaking very roughly there. I think the mechanism might be a little bit different, so don't castrate me if I misspoke there. Fairly effective. It doesn't have as much of the weight gain issues that typical SSRIs have. The side effect profile in many ways is much better. It improves cognition instead of making cognition worse, which is a great feature. The only issue with Trintellix is it makes you puke violently, especially in the beginning. I know people who have projectile vomited on it. I think if you get over that, it's great, but not everyone does. The GI manifestations of this can be very bad. So it's kind of like if we took an SSRI, made it slightly more effective, got rid of some of its side effects, but then added on a lot of puking. Your mileage may vary on that, but that to me is a C. Moving on to Amtrip. So amitriptyline is a tricyclic antidepressant. I was not getting out of here without naming my tricyclics. So tricyclics aren't used that much anymore. They can be very effective drugs. Again, kind of anecdotal, but amitriptyline tends to be one of the most effective antidepressants that's out there. It's used in a lot of animal studies as like a model antidepressant because it works very well, and because there's a lot of data on its use in animals, because it's an old drug. It's not quite as old as MAOIs, but it's old. You have to think, this comes out not right after MAOIs, but it's the next drug out, right? So usually with antidepressants back in the 60s, right, you have the cheese effect, which isn't really well known yet. People just have blood pressure issues. But you have MAOIs in general, and they have really bad side effects, and then tricyclics come out, and they don't have a lot of those issues that MAOIs have, because they are much more selective. However, tricyclic side effects are not great. A lot of dry mouth, a lot of sedation with amitriptyline. It's used sometimes for sleep. So amitriptyline is not really prescribed too much, say, for depression. Its main uses actually are off-label for chronic pain, neuropathic cough, as a drug for neuropathic diseases, amitriptyline is really effective. So it's a great tale of a drug that has been repurposed and used in a great way. It's still a good antidepressant though. This doesn't get prescribed very often. This is going to go into B tier because, no, I'm giving Nefazodone an A. I'm going to give amitriptyline an A. Just because of how many off-label uses it has and how well it works for those. Because things like fibromyalgia pain, migraines, neuropathic pain, neuropathic cough, those are not easy to treat. So anything that's even slightly effective is great. Well, migraine has good options for treatment. But anyway, amitrip is good. I'm putting it in A. Sue me. Clomipramine is another TCA. Has a lot of the same issues that amitriptyline has. It has really, really strong serotogenic activity. So its side effect profile can be kind of rough. It's another one of those big tricyclic guns for depression. It's very effective. For treatment-resistant depression, clomipramine is often mentioned up there with MAOIs for this is the biggest gun you have. Maybe not nowadays because we're getting new treatments, but it's a very strong drug. It's also considered the gold standard for OCD. Extremely good OCD drug. So for those reasons, I'm going to put it in... I'm going to have to put this in B tier. I want to give it an A, but the side effect profile is nasty and doesn't have the off-label uses that amitrip has, so it's not really fair. And now we get to this shiny rock, and this shiny rock is lithium. So lithium is typically associated with bipolar depression, and it might not actually be approved for unipolar depression, so I might have broken my own rule, but I'm going to pretend I didn't. It's often used as an adjunctive agent in unipolar depression because lithium is really, really good at reducing suicidality. It's one of the only things that can quickly and effectively reduce the risk of suicide. And in very high-risk patients, that is very important. And for a lot of people, lithium is an augmenting agent that improves their mood significantly. And if you have bipolar disorder, especially bipolar 1, lithium is a great mood stabilizer that can help put off a lot of manic episodes. The issues with lithium, it's kind of hard in your body. It's usually in the form of lithium carbonate, and you have to get a lot of blood work done if you're taking it. It can make you feel a little dopey and out of it. It can make you feel very blunted. It's not perfect. It's very heavy on your body. But it has very important clinical uses, and there are things lithium can do that not many other things can do. I'm going to give lithium a B. Might be a little bit high, but I just think it has qualities to it that nothing else has, and there's a need for what it's got. So because I can't do off-label, and I can't just do ketamine off-label, IV ketamine, I put Spravato in here. Spravato is interesting. Kind of like how Lexapro was an enantiomerically pure version of Celexa. Spravato is an enantiomerically pure version of ketamine. It's called Esketamine because it is S-ketamine, I believe. And Johnson & Johnson basically just did this so they could patent ketamine because ketamine is so old, it's off patent, it has no exclusivity. The people in ketamine treatment centers make money because they're doctors and they're administering the ketamine to you. But ketamine is a cheap off-label drug. But S-ketamine is not. It's very expensive. But here's the thing. It can be approved by insurance because it is an approved treatment for depression. And as a result, you can get esketamine approved by your insurance, but not IV ketamine, or sometimes even ketamine lozenges, right? So for a lot of people who want ketamine therapy and don't have the money to go for the expensive IV treatments, they're taking esketamine kind of because they don't have a choice. Eskedamine's decent. It doesn't work as well as IV ketamine, but it also is not IV. It is through a nasal administration, so you spray it in your nose. And if you're going to get ketamine, if you're going to be going on like a little bit of a ketamine trip, having it go in your nose and then maybe laying down in the presence of a doctor, healthcare professional, is much better than having an IV in you. Going down the ketamine trip there with an IV in your arm, like effectively immobilized on a bed, can be very uncomfortable and scary. So that's a big benefit to it. It seems to be less effective than IV ketamine though, and it is just a scam by Johnson & Johnson. So I'm going to give it a B tier for the ketamine efficacy and for the ease of administration, relatively speaking. But I'm going to give it a C for I hate Johnson & Johnson. And don't think I forgot the hood classic, Wellbutrin. Wellbutrin is a good drug. It is not a perfect drug, but it is a good one. Wellbutrin should really be, in my opinion, first-line antidepressant treatment for all depression, really, that it does not have severe comorbid anxiety. Its side effect profile is miles better than SSRI. It does not have anti-sexual effects. It has pro-sexual effects. It is a stimulant, not a strong one. It has very little addictive properties, right? It's not really habit forming. You do have to taper off it. It's like an SSRI, and it does have a discontinuation syndrome, but that discontinuation syndrome is typically just being very fatigued, not motivated. It is effective as an antidepressant as well. I wouldn't say it's any more effective than SSRI, maybe a little bit more. It's nothing crazy powerful, but the risk benefit, or if you aren't thinking about like the FDA, the pros and cons as a consumer, the pros aren't huge, but the cons are pretty small. It can make you agitated, right? It's a stimulant. It can make you uncomfortable. It raises your heart rate. If you have a lot of anxiety, this could make it worse. But it's typically much better tolerated, in my opinion. It also does not have weight gain problems. It helps you keep weight off. Which again, if you're very depressed, getting a burst of energy, right? Having something help you keep weight off, really useful. It's also decent's a strong word, but if you have comorbid ADHD or executive dysfunction as a result of your depression, those stimulant effects go a long way. So I think it is a very useful drug. It's not amazing. I can't give it an A, but it's a B. It belongs up there. And if it didn't have the seizure problem, it would have been the biggest antidepressant, I think, today. The seizure problem being that very high doses, Wellbutrin can cause seizures. It can cause seizures at any dose, very, very rarely. Very high doses, the risk of seizures becomes much higher. Back when they originally released this drug, they were dosing people too high. Like 450 milligrams was a commonly used dose. Now that's still used, but only very rarely. This dose too high, people got seizures. It kind of scared the public off. And then Prozac came out, and Prozac stole the show for a while. But Wellbutrin is great. It's also good for smoking cessation as well. Under the, I guess it's called Bupurian, right? That's the chemical name. And I think in the UK it's called Zyban. And Zyban is used for smoking cessation. Something like that. It's really useful. So that is my tier list. I'm sorry if some of that was a pseudoscientific ramble. I don't remember everything about all of these drugs. This wasn't really meant to be a scientific dissertation. Just kind of my opinions. Don't take anything I use here as medical advice, but if it gives you something to look into, definitely talk to your doctor. Look up all this stuff and see what your options are. Because a lot of psychiatrists sometimes can be a little uncreative. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes you need to be measured and not try everything under the sun. But if stuff isn't working for you, you should know there's a lot of options out there. You just have to, look for them. Hopefully this taught someone something. Anyway, this is Sterkis, sign off. Thank you for watching. If you fucking hate Vilazodone, subscribe, I guess. Thanks, bye.